Hi everyone. So this lecture is your very first lecture on the book Forbidden Fruit, Engaging an Indigenous Feminist Lens as a Nehinaw Iskwew, and it is written by Marlene McKay, PhD. And of course, I think even from the title, it's pretty clear this is written by an academic. So the objectives are, I want to briefly go over a biography of the author. There are quite a few terms and definitions I want to look at. Just a very brief discussion about the book. And then I want to discuss the introduction, and that is the end of this lecture, which is, I think, more than enough. So this is an image of Marlene McKay. She is Swampy Cree from northern Saskatchewan. She has 4 university degrees, and I believe one of them is in anthropology. I'm quite certain of that. I'm not going to read this out. You can, of course, read this yourself, but she is, as you can tell even from reading this, interested in, and this comes up over and over again, this, I'm highlighting it, identity, categories of race, class, status, and gender. This is her overarching theme, her focus, or her thesis. So that's, sorry, my baby is still awake. I'm not sure if you can hear. So just one moment. So sorry for having to pause, but so definitely this phrase identity categories of race, class, status, and gender, we see this returning. And this is obviously an official about the author. It comes from the place where her, the publishing house of where her book was published. So terms and definitions. So these are, I thought we would work through just even the book title initially, and then 3 quite difficult terms that she defines colonialism, certainly, but not so much the other 2. In any event, we're going to look at the idiom forbidden fruit, the term Indigenous, and as it applies to people. The term feminist, a lens, as in academic lens, colonialism, post-colonialism, and neo-colonialism. So as I just indicated, forbidden fruit is a phrase, an idiom, and it is, an idiom is just, it just means a group of words established as having a meaning that may be unrelated to each word's definition. So like some examples are, it's raining cats and dogs, she gave him the cold shoulder, we went on a wild goose chase, he got a taste of his own medicine. Those kinds of phrasing. Forbidden fruit refers to an item, object, or person that is prohibited. And according to the Cambridge Dictionary, forbidden fruit refers to something that is desired all the more because it is forbidden. And if you don't know, the phrase originates from the Garden of Eden story, which appears in the book of Genesis. The type of fruit is not mentioned. However, it is often understood or believed to be an apple. In the story, God forbids Adam and Eve to touch the fruit of the tree of knowledge. This is a blurb that is from Indigenous Foundations, which is found on the UBC website. And it's just talking about terminology, how the original was quite popular until probably maybe even the last 5 years. And then the word Indigenous has replaced it. So it's talking about the importance of terminology and why this matters. And of course, you can pause this and read it. Indigenous peoples is a collective term for the original peoples of a geographical place, for example, Canada, and of course their descendants. the term Indigenous is increasingly replacing the term Aboriginal, as the term Indigenous is recognized internationally, especially because of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Pardon me. A feminist is a person who supports feminism. So if you say, I am a feminist, it is indicating that you support feminism. And feminism is a social and political movement. And it has many incarnations. It looks different depending on the time period. But it is primarily about campaigning for equality between genders. McKay is using the word lens as an acritical lens, and that's basically the idea of a critical lens. Is if you look at a reading or a piece of material or a film through kind of a theory. So a post-colonial lens, a Marxist lens, understanding that all of these theories have their own biases. And of course you can, as you know, pause this and read the definition I have written down for you. So when it comes to the ideas of colonialism, post-colonialism, neo-colonialism, I really want to stress that colonialism isn't a thing, like a mode of being for a nation that resides in the past. So for example, the United States has grown from I think it's 800,000 square miles in 1789 to 3.5 million as of 2019 square miles, and it has done this through territorial acquisitions. So it controls 5 unincorporated, organized, and inhabited territories: Puerto Rico, Guam, Northern Mariana Islands, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and American Samoa. And of course, they also control 9 minor outlying islands. And this is as of 2019. Interesting, the United States also leased the Panama Canal zone from 1903 to 1999. They purchased the state of Louisiana in 1803 for $10 million. They purchased Alaska for $10 per square mile. And they also purchased the Virgin Islands. And I think that was for almost $200,000 per square mile. So I'm giving you kind of that information because the United States is a nation that colonizes. So this colonizing is not a thing that resides in the past. It is alive and well. And the policy or practice of acquiring full or partial political control over another nation, occupying it with settlers, which is, I think, kind of the notion most of us think of when we think of colonialism. We think of it as, and farmers came in and they settled the land. It's also about exploiting the nation economically. So, in this sense, colonialism continues to live, even in Canada. Post-colonialism is the historical period of the aftermath of Western colonialism. So the term can also be used to describe the concurrent project to reclaim and rethink the history and agency of people subordinated under these various forms of imperialism. So post-colonialism is almost kind of like a theory of thought, more than it is a lived experience. Neocolonialism is the practice of using economics, globalization, cultural imperialism, and conditional aid to influence a country instead of like the previous colonial methods of direct military control or indirect political control or settlements, those kinds of things. So, so at this point, we've already discovered a fair bit about this book, and we can even like think of just all of that information she has provided us just in the title alone. So it's almost a very heavy download of information, especially well, from the title to the end of the book. I did want to point out that Nehinaw Iskwew means swampy Cree woman, and that's how she is translating it for her language. I am not Swampy Cree. I am Métis. I am familiar with some Cree. I'm unfamiliar with Swampy Cree. So I've never been a person that is overly fond of introductions as a reader. I think they serve kind of a purpose in academic work. You can kind of skim through and get the picture of the entire text within the introduction. I don't know, honestly, if that's the case with this introduction. I don't feel like she's, in essence, introduced the book. But let's return to that idea at a later date. What I think is important is if we consider how she actually is using language, and that she came to language as a second language. Her mother tongue is Swampy Cree. So considering the loss of language within Indigenous communities, the knowledge of Indigenous languages is incredibly valuable. So she contains the knowledge of Swampy Cree as her mother tongue. So if we just consider what that might mean, first of all, it's incredibly exciting that she has this base of knowledge. But also if we think like, well, how does language actually shape us? So my mother, for example, spoke the language of our nation, which is Michif. She also knew the language of her father's lineage, Plains Cree. She knew Bunji, and this is a lesser known language of a segment of the Métis, and that segment is coming from the Scottish fur traders. She knew, of course, English. So if we consider, like, even in like Plains Cree, as in Swampy Cree and Michif, there is no word to denote gender. Not that language is genderless. It's just the pronoun. There's one pronoun for he, she, and it. So the he and she and it is non-existent, and not only that, those languages, but many. So there's even this idea of, well, how might that shape your sensibilities? And like, you know, how does language just in general shape a culture, people, an individual? Like, so, okay, for example, recently Japan, I think it was in the spring of 2019, Japan ushered in like a new emperor. And when they get a new emperor, it's they usher in like this kind of new era. And this new era of 2019 for Japan is called, obviously in English, harmony. So Japan has a tradition of naming eras, and this reflects their ancient belief in the divine spirit of language. And they have a word for word spirit. And it's the idea that words have an almost magical power to alter physical reality. And that may sound maybe a little preposterous, but there's an article in Scientific American, and they talk about, and I'm quoting now, when two neurons respond to a stimulus, such as a spoken word, They begin to form chemical and physical pathways to each other, which are strengthened or weakened depending on how often they are co-activated. This process of neurons that fire together, wire together, is the basis for all learning and is reflected in the formation of gray matter, where neurons communicate with each other, and in white matter, where they connect to gray matter regions. So the brain's ability to adapt to its environment explains how we become specialized to the sounds of our native tongue. So ultimately, the article says that the inputs that our brain receives shape how we experience the world around us. So consider when McKay writes in her introduction, when Cree is spoken, the speaker is silent. Rather, the person spoken about is the active subject and not the speaker. Whereas when English is spoken, the speaker is like the apex of identity, is the entire importance. I am speaking, I am saying something, I am the most important thing in my speaking in English. So even if we think of that, it's actually really fascinating how language can shape who we are. So if we look at her introduction and just really try to pay attention to her vocabulary and what words she relies upon and why, and of course what she's saying. So she writes, the message I learned was I did not matter. She writes, not talking about feelings was modeled by everyone around the house. For the people in my life, living was demonstrated by doing and being productive. Male domination is certainly demonstrated in Catholicism and some of the Christian teachings. I was being socialized that I did not matter. Again, we're seeing I did not matter. She says that quite a lot in the introduction. I did not matter. This socialization started right from birth, and I recently came to an understanding that this early training contributed to an overinflated sense of insignificance. Imagine that sentence. Just think of living in that sentence. An overinflated sense of insignificance. She writes, I believe post-colonialism is hard to imagine. Colonialism is when Europeans came over, took over, made rules for First Nations people, and then relegated us on the margins of society. Some people would say we live in a post-colonial era. However, when I think about how Indigenous women are treated and positioned in society and our communities, it is hardly a demonstration of post-colonialism. You see the recurring word demonstrated, demonstrating, demonstration. She writes, when I say colonial hierarchical socialization, I mean that society, including Indigenous communities, are organized around, and here we get the identity, categories of race, class, gender, sexual orientation. So here it is on page 5, like I think 2 pages into her introduction, when we see that thesis, really the focus of her work and of this book. So then she goes on to give us a brief sort of feminist reading list that shaped her own thinking. And again, notice her languages. She uses words repetitively. Modeled, of course, demonstrated, positioning, contextualized, theoretical lens, social construction, positioned, situated. Considered how often, in only a matter of a few pages, she writes the word insignificant. She continues, much of this influence was taught through our education system, churches, and colonization was modeled around male dominance. Identity categories, again, of race, class, gender, able-bodied, heterosexism all contribute to positioning women in different ways that are about celebrating or silencing us. She writes or reiterates, And this is in a matter of pages. We have heard this focus now, I think, for easily the third time. My decision is to write my story in the context of race, class, and gender. These three identity categories cannot be separated, nor should they be. She writes, again, identity categories of gender, race, and class dictate how people are situated. So it's a really interesting introduction. It's not really introducing the book other than the thesis of the book, but it's really introducing her thinking and how she began to think this way and her education. And so it's a very different way of introducing work, academic or otherwise, or a memoir. I also wanted to point out the photo is of Little Bear, and he fled Canada after the Northwest Rebellion. He left with Little Poplar and about 350 Cree people to the United States, fearing persecution from the newly formed Canadian government. When they arrived in America, they were identified as refugees by the American government. And they left right around 1885. And by 1895, so they were in America for 10 years and not living easily at all, living as refugees and kind of within an odd gap within, kind of like falling through the cracks of policy. Little Bear and his Cree followers were in 1895 forced back into Canada. They were met at the border, and Little Bear and Little Poplar were promptly arrested. They were both eventually released, and the charges were dropped. Little Bear returned with his Cree followers to the United States, and he eventually found a home for his people in the Rocky Boy Reservation, which is in Montana. But that didn't happen until 1916. So that's nearly 30 years after the Riel rebellions that Little Bear was actually able to find his people a home. They wandered kind of in this weird like refugee status or for decades. So that is the introduction. I think it's not that long, but it's incredibly dense. These photographs, the photograph to the far left is from Little Bear's reservation in Montana, the Rocky Boy Reservation. This photo is titled Chippewa and Cree. I'm not sure if you would know. I imagine if you were Cree, you would know that this gentleman here is Cree, and this person here is Chippewa. And then this photograph is kind of identified there, but it is of two Cree people. I thought it was interesting, and their coats are made, of course, from blankets, as I'm sure all of you at this point can recognize. In any event, I hope that you're enjoying McKay's book. It's a difficult read, but I think, and I know her writing she's not a creative writer, she's an academic, but I'm hoping that you are enjoying it. And I will be posting a few more. I hope not too many more videos, but I'll be posting for sure 3 or 4 more sections to work our way through her book. Okay, well, thank you very much. I hope you're having a lovely week. Welcome back after reading week. And of course, if you have any questions, I'm available in my office hours on Wednesday, or just email me if those don't work for you guys. Okay, bye.